Welcome to the Word Love Morphology pilot. Very excited and very grateful that you'll be joining us for this pilot for as long as you care to join. I want to talk a little bit about I'm going to be, first of all, I want to say thank you for your time. I know it's a Sunday and I know it's the summer, so I'm going to be as brief as I can. Talk a little bit about why behind the unit, what it is, talk about a little bit about the approach that it takes, and the structure. I'll walk you through the structure of the pilot, what's done so far, and talk about any other logistics, how to fit it in, how to get ready for it. And then I'll just sort of underscore some of my requests for joining the pilot. And then I will send it to you and we'll be on our merry way. This meeting is being recorded just because, like I said, I appreciate those of you who are able to be here live, because you can also chat with me about this when we're done. But it is being recorded for others who also would like to join the pilot. So welcome again. I think some of the whys behind the unit are maybe to a lot of us pretty self-evident. I think morphology is a popular concept right now when it comes to literacy. So I send out a lot of surveys throughout the year, and I want to know your interests in things. And I was actually trying to remember like why morphology, and I think it was because of a survey. It certainly is a part of vocabulary acquisition, so it's a natural part. It's not as if came out of thin air, but in conjunction with it being a part of vocabulary acquisition and being such a keen interest of educators all over, I decided to give it a start. So I've been drafting little bits here and there throughout the year, and I decided to sit down and devote myself to a little bit more of it over the summer, and with your feedback even more. So it's exciting. So the unit is vocabulary morphology. So I think I've shared that a little bit in previous prefaces. Morphology is, right, if we break down the words, it's either like the study of how things change, morph, or shape. I think morph is maybe technically means shape. Somebody corrected me on that. And so specifically the shapes of words, but there's different aspects of studying the shapes of words. You could study morphology through the lens of decoding how to pronounce the word and how to use your knowledge of morphology to read a word. You could use morphology also to help you encode a word, to spell a word, use your knowledge of those word parts. Since I've taken a vocabulary angle, this morphology will be taking the angle of vocabulary, which is meaning, so that this will be in service of how do you use your knowledge of morphology to figure out what words mean as you're reading. As you may know, over some of the things I talk about with Word Love, that Word Love itself is just one part of a vocabulary program. There's other parts. You want kids to be aware and curious of words and what they do. You want kids to just read a ton. You want to teach kids individual words, but you also want to give them strategies for figuring out words when they're by themselves. And so that's what this is. And this is particularly one of the strategies, which is look inside a word and break it apart to figure out what it means. The other two being look in, look around, or look it up. This is focusing specifically on looking in. So if you're interested in things like using vocabulary or morphology to help you decode or encode, there are other curricula that can help you with that, certainly. And I bet by teaching this, your kids will glean a little bit of that information just naturally, but just know that that's not the thrust. It's about vocabulary. It's about meaning. It's in service of helping kids understand unknown words as they are reading. I read some research by, I think it was Nagy and Anderson, who said, vocabulary researchers, who said that if a child can unlock the meaning of one word by themselves, they can unlock up to 3 to 4 as many times words. You understand what I'm saying? It's the end of the day, my words lose me. But if you can triple or quadruple your vocabulary acquisition simply by being able to figure out what one word means, I mean, so this is a pretty powerful strategy. So that's what this is going to do. Some of the approach that I like to take behind this is, you'll notice that a lot of the approaches I take are content first, and then we move into the skill and strategy of it too. So what you'll see in this unit is, in order to apply your skill of breaking apart a word to figure out what it means and using the word parts, you have to know what the word parts mean, right? You can't break it apart or you can break it apart, but you can't really do anything with it if you don't know what the parts mean. But once you know what the parts mean, then you can apply the skill and the strategy. And so I'm always trying to intertwine skills, which is that's like a type of procedural knowledge, things that you do with automaticity, and content. That's like things you know right away. And you'll notice in literacy and education, sometimes some people focus on just skills, some people focus just content. Really, the truth is it's a little bit of both. But what comes first? Sometimes skill does come first, and sometimes content does first. And in my mind, when you're working with morphology, you need to know a little bit of content, and that's what this unit is going to do. So these aren't units that last all year. Depending on how successful they are based on your feedback, there'll be units that last for, maybe third, fourth, and fifth grade. We'll each get a little batch of prefixes to learn, suffixes to learn, and some Greek and Latin word parts to learn. But for today, everybody's going to get the same thing. And based on your feedback, we'll develop it from there to see what's successful and what's less successful. So that's some of the philosophy behind it. Let's go over the structure. And I think the best way to do that is just to share it with you on my screen. And before you go, you'll get it, I promise. All right. So for those of you who've been doing the traditional word love or individual word learning, you'll notice there's going to be a lot of familiar activities or games or word workouts. So what I attempt to do in all my writing is I try to also incorporate cognitive learning strategies. And so one is to help teach for transfers, to teach whole, part, whole. You give kids the whole smorgasbord, then you teach the constituent parts, then you go over the smorgasbord again. And that's what Grant Wiggins says really helps with transfer, to teach whole, part, whole. And so on day one, we're just going to go over the whole smorgasbord. We're going to touch on prefixes, suffixes. We'll go more specifically into roots, and there'll be a quick common activity. Do you recognize any? Can you think of any others? Very brief, because again, I want these to be brief things that you can tuck in your day that aren't going to be like a half an hour a day, or an hour a day for a week. It's 5 minutes a day or less, and you can devote. If it goes past 5 minutes, then stop teaching it and teach the rest of it the next day. Like you can teach it across time. It'll be just as successful. Space practice is a good strategy with kids too. After you teach the whole smorgasbord, then you do a smorgasbord on prefixes. Let me introduce the concept of a prefix with you, and let's do a quick activity. Now I'm trying to always think of like what might be some clever analogies and metaphors. And right now I've gone on I thought about like maybe word mechanics, like we're taking apart words and putting them back together. I thought about word surgery. That's the one I landed on for now, just because surgeons are estimable. But on the other hand, there's this idea of like cutting. So I don't know. You let me know if there's a better metaphor that you like. But right now I'm working with surgery, and mechanics is in the hopper if need be. After we do 2 brief little overview lessons, we start going into 4 prefixes. I don't need to go into too many. If this is expanded, my hope is that there'll be 8 prefixes per grade, like 3rd, 4th, and 5th, so that one grade isn't responsible for all the most common prefixes. But for the scope of what I'm handing you, it's just going to be 4 prefixes and 4 suffixes. And the intent is going to expand it so that there's also Greek and Latin word parts as well. It's just a matter of everything's been selected, just a matter of writing it, which takes time. And I don't want to get too far before you tell me what's working and what's not. So what happens is we have just a quick introduction of the prefix, what it means. Try to make I thought about a little icon that could go with it, and also a gesture that could go with it. People have told me that gestures have been very helpful. And then like 2 quick examples. Kimberly Fox, my partner in all this, has been kind enough to lend her hand literally to make these beautiful charts. And when you get it, you just click it. It'll be right here. There will be all the charts. By the way, if you see any typos or things that are errors, or you want to talk back to them, that would be something to tell me. Like, I think a better way to phrase this would be XYZ, or Mike, that's not quite right. You won't hurt my feelings. Then we do some more, what I'm calling word surgery. Let's take these words apart and put them back together. There is a question of like how kids will do this, because I do think some of this needs to be some writing, right? So whether it's on a whiteboard or some sort of notebook, I leave that up to you. And the reason for that is I found through some of these activities that kids aren't able to eyeball breaking apart words. Some kids can, and maybe some older kids, if you have 5th graders, they might be able to look at a word and they can eyeball it. but I certainly know working with third graders that they can't just eyeball words. Like once you play this yay or nay game, which of these have the prefix on and which don't? 8-year-olds, their brains will get scrambled. They'll be like, you just told me that un is a prefix. So therefore, yeah, under is a prefix. So you just want them to underline what they think is the root and bracket. Yes, bracket, because there's going to be different designations for prefixes and suffixes. What they think is the prefix, and you'll see your 8-year-olds go, oh, maybe the 5th graders can handle it, but even still, I'd rather err on the safe side because you'll have a variety of learners who may not just be able to eyeball it. Again, there will be little tips here for things that can help you out. So that's basically it for the first part. So you notice we're going to introduce the prefixes. Same thing, you know, break them apart and then play a yay or nay game. So again, if you're familiar with word love, these are things that everybody will be familiar with. And then what we do is we're going to learn the prefixes more deeply. I've given you options. Now, when you're piloting, you don't have to do all the options, although you can if you want. If you want to feel like you give a more robust feedback, I would be so grateful for it, but do what you can do. It may take you longer to get through it, and that's okay. I'd rather have good feedback than cursory, brief feedback. Whatever you can give is great, by the way. You're not required to do anything. But there's 3 different options, and you'll notice like some of these games are familiar. You're like, and the reason they're familiar is because they are doing the same cognitive sort of step. So first, we're just going to do a yes or no. Can you identify the prefix? Then can you sort of associate the prefixes? If I give an example, can you connect the prefix to the right example? Then we'll do a generating. Can you generate some things using these prefixes? Can you use these prefixes now? And then we'll do a relationship game where, like, can you hold the meaning of 2 different prefixes at once in your mind, so to speak? So that's the idea. Eventually, you'll notice a lot of these games are familiar, right? Who, what, when, where, why, hypothetically speaking, trifecta, tryouts. There's some new ones. I don't know if this is a great game, but maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it's basically like, see if you can find some in your books that you've been reading. And then a nice game that if you've been doing the character vocabulary, this is a game that I've added to character vocabulary, the analogies game. I really like this game. Cognitively, this is going to be deeper, right? So if you disuse something, you aren't using it. If you reuse something, fill in the blank. If you misuse something, fill in the blank. Mashup remix is back. Would you rather is all over it. Would you rather can either be an example, non-example game or a relating game, depending on how it's used. And then since we are trying to go into texts, that's the end goal. I have been putting in some fables. You'll know if you've done character vocabulary, I use fables because they're free. You can access them. You don't have to purchase a text. And I think they teach lessons. There's a reason they've been around for centuries. That's not a coincidence. And they're also short, so you can just like get them finished. So I updated this one. I think this is the boy in the filberts, and I had to look up what a filbert is. Apparently it's a hazelnut, maybe. It's a nut, but I just changed it to candy. It's the same idea. And I also added in some words, the prefixes, so kids can do some inferring of what the words mean. You could turn this into an assessment if you want, but right now it's just an activity. Kim Fox was kind enough to kind of make it. So the little fable here. There are a couple of assessments. I'm not too strongly tied to them. Like I said, this could be the assessment. You just have to have questions that go with it. I'm really keen on hearing what you think about the assessment. But again, we have a multiple choice. And then we have a write a sentence. I don't know. You tell me what works. Try out different ones. I know a lot of times when I piloted word love for individual words, people were very opinionated. I don't mean that in a bad way, but there are a lot of different opinions and views on their assessment. So I want to know what yours are. And it might be I just give a bunch of options because everybody's got their own preference for kids to show what they know. But if you find one is better than the other, or you prefer one, please let me know because I value that kind of input. And then we do a rinse and repeat with suffixes. You do a smorgasbord with suffixes, like here's like what a suffix is. Let's just play around with it, even though I haven't really taught any of them to you. Then we're going to break it down into suffixes, some specific suffixes. Now, a word on suffixes. We're focusing on derivational suffixes, not inflectional suffixes for the scope of this project for right now. Derivational suffixes meaning these are suffixes that change the word's meaning, what the word means, not inflectional suffixes, which change like the tense or the inflection of the word. Inflectional suffixes are great for multilingual language learners. Most native English speakers already have a felt sense for inflectional suffixes. That does not mean they're not important and worth teaching. It just means they're not the scope of this project for right now. Might they be in the future? It's possible, but not at the moment. So derivational suffixes is what we're working on. Able, we have less. We have which for those of you who are nerds like me, could be an inflectional suffix if you're talking about bigger, but we're talking about person who in this case as a derivational suffix. And I am in the middle of finishing the last activities for suffixes, but it's going to be the same thing. You see, put in a sub, matching mentions, and so on. Needs a name. So I don't imagine, maybe somebody's piloting these ASAP, and if you are, you've got 18 days to catch up to me. So I'm not too concerned, but this will be done by the time you give it a launch. Do I have a timeline on when to pilot it? I mean, I'd love to have your feedback in, before Thanksgiving and even earlier than that if possible, but I'll take it whenever I can get it. Because I think I'll value both people who are able to teach it quickly and can give quick feedback, but then I'll also value people who are able to, really put a lot of time and thought into their feedback too. So whatever your style is, if you want to crank it out, give me the feedback quickly, awesome. If you want to take your time with it, that's awesome too. I'm just grateful because, we can talk about research, theory, and philosophy, but until it hits the rubber hits the ground in the classrooms, that's the missing link. If you are interested in a bibliography, here it is. You'll notice I lean on Michael Graves. Michael Graves, he wrote the vocabulary book. He does a lot of work with this particular aspect of vocabulary morphology. Whereas I really like Beck and McKeon's work for individual word learning. So you can check out that if you want. So, thank you, Linda. I'll take how many weeks for the pilot? Well, it looks like as of right now, it's about 21 days. And so 21 days is in real time, sort of 4 to 6 weeks. However, I mean, even if you just do the prefix portion, that will give a good idea of how it could go because a lot of it kind of transfers over into the suffix portion too. And so it's like a month, ideally, would probably be the time. I think one of the things I'll send you, if you'd like, is like a little diary or a journal, so you can like write notes about each thing as you do them. Because sometimes seeing the feedback live can help me make it better live, especially for those of you who are like paving the way for others. That's always nice. And once I get a sense of, because generally you can get a sense when several people are kind of saying the same thing, then it's like, okay, that's a thing. And so once I get a sense of what the feedback is, what's working, what could be even better, then I'll go ahead and start making those improvements and then keep pushing forward so that like each grade will have a set of 8 prefixes, 8 suffixes. I think I'm just going to go with 4 Greek, 4 Latin word parts for each grade. And that's if it's successful. If it kind of is not as successful as we would hope it would be, we'll see. But I think it's going to be okay. I think it's going to be solid. I think with your feedback, it's going to be quite nice and familiar. And I think it's needed and wanted. But I want to hear what you have to say. So yeah, but the pilot is geared for 3 to 5. If you wanted to do it for 6 and above, I'm certainly could. For 2nd grade, I mean, I would stick to just prefixes. I mean, I'm even going on a limb by doing suffixes in 3rd grade, according to what a lot of the researchers recommend. So I guess that's another thing I would say. If you are teaching younger kids, especially 3rd graders, go easy on the suffixes in terms of don't fret if they're not like totally getting them right away. Treat it as immersion and exposure. But it's totally appropriate to start teaching prefixes to kids starting in 3rd grade. So what that means is if you want to go younger than third grade, I would not do suffixes, and I would go with a very light approach to prefixes like immersion, exposure, and maybe just stick to some of the easier games. Maybe you don't go to the hardest games as well. So that would be another thing. Could you do it in middle school? Yeah, I mean, maybe, I've worked with a lot of middle schools this past year, and they were really into this part. I mean, because a lot of them are science teachers, or they teach content where they do a lot of work with these kind of suffixes too, and it can really help them as they're teaching their science vocabulary. So by all means, you could go higher. There's really no limit. I just caution with younger kids that you want to treat it more as immersion and exposure, and really great all of your efforts that you're making. I'm not going to be stressed. But third grade, it's appropriate to start teaching prefixes explicitly, and in fourth and fifth grade, it starts to get more appropriate to teach suffixes explicitly. You tell me though, if you're hearing from fourth graders the suffixes are tricky, well, that would confirm what some researchers are saying. If you tell me that fourth graders are doing fine with the suffixes, then that's interesting, because a lot of researchers sort of caution against getting too deep with derivational suffixes for younger kids. And we're going to go Greek and Latin roots at some point, so that will definitely be immersion exposure for all. Are the pilot lessons likely going to be for third grade? I think right now I'm starting in, this is third grade. So what I'm going to be adding would be fourth and fifth grade. And so if you're seeing especially if you're seeing the prefix lessons are tricky, then that would be something for me to be alerted to, like super tricky. Again, we all know third grade, they start the year very young, very concrete too. So let's just keep that in mind. It's not the end of the world if you're a third grade teacher and you want to choose to do this in the second half. It's not of the school year. It won't be the end of the world. It means I'll be receiving your feedback later. But it also might be more appropriate. But again, we'll find out. It depends on the class and what they're ready for. And again, if kids have a trickiness with it, you just treat it as immersion exposure, not stress with them. But I think, like I said, fourth and fifth grade certainly should be able to handle all these things. I'm just going to be fascinated to see what you say. Jen, the materials are going to arrive right now. So these are the materials, and I'm going to keep, I am going to share them in a link, and I will also send them in an email afterwards, especially for the people who signed up who aren't able to attend. So we had a lot of people sign up. We had a lot of people register, but I know they couldn't make it, but maybe they just want to indicate their support. Here it is for now. You should be able to access it. This is a pilot, so this is not something to just share willy-nilly. This is something to take seriously. And please don't, share. It's not just like a resource to be given out. I haven't, it might be given out at the end, and when we're done with it and we've given feedback, I do try to at least give people an opportunity to say this is free, and this is for the public, as a gift. And certainly, whether it is or not, if you're a pilot and you give feedback, you will receive the final version. That will be my thank you to you. I do see the lessons taking 5 minutes per day, but if they're taking longer, please let me know and break them up if they need to. I think it really depends on how much time, because we could give things more time than they need. Certainly, you can make something go 10, 15, 20 minutes if you wanted to. And so if you do, that's your choice, but the goal is for it to be rather brief. So you'll notice a lot of the word lists are just like 4 words, because some of the things are asking kids to write things down. And have you ever asked kids to write things down? It takes some time. And so I don't want to give them 7, 8 words, and then they're sitting there, some kids are done in 30 seconds and some kids are 5 minutes later still on the second word. And so all of this will be, it's a pilot. So again, this is early stage. It has been thought through. I've brought it to schools already. I've already done it a little bit myself. But just keep in mind, this is an early stage. This isn't something that is it's done public. I hope you enjoy. You're in the testing stage. So part of that testing is testing fits and starts, successes, things like that. So if you are sharing it with others, oh, our whole team's doing it, our whole grade's doing it, just with a word of caution, it's a pilot. It's not here's the final thing. And so comes with things like that may come unexpected things, may come frustration, may come joy, and that's just to embrace all that process. So Mary, this is for everybody right now. These are for everybody at the moment. If you feel like they're too easy, well, then that would be your feedback. These are too easy. If you feel like it's too hard, then you'd say that would be too hard. But right now it's a 3 through 5, all at once. Some things, Lori, great questions, by the way, Lori. Some things I learned from the pilot were to limit the number of words that kids are like breaking apart, limit the number of words that kids are, doing that word surgery with, because like I said, it's one thing when you have kids just turn and talk, like you can end a turn and talk like this and bring the group back together. But when you're writing a word on a whiteboard or a notebook and kids have different, speeds and experiences with writing things, it might take a little bit longer. So I tried to limit that. Yeah. And so keeping it brief is what I learned, but I'm certainly keen on what you have to say about it. I think it will be fun. It's certainly based on the research. I'm not pulling things out of thin air. I'm just sort of synthesizing what I'm reading, and trying to make it fun and enjoyable and what people seem to want and need. That doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, but I'm hoping it's good, and you'll be able to help me out with that. Can this done be in small groups? Certainly it can be done in small groups. It can be whole group, small group, whatever you prefer. Should you make a copy? Well, as long as you're able to come back to that document and put a little star on it, how you can star documents, or put a little safe, because I will be updating it. And so if you make a copy, you'll lose the updates. I just ask that you're not just sharing it willy-nilly with people who may or may not be committed to piloting. Because again, my pilot requests are just feedback and fidelity, that you provide feedback and that you do it with a degree of faithfulness. That doesn't mean like if you find something better, like certainly if you find something better, tell me what you did and how that went, especially if it was fun and creative and successful. Would this be good questions? I wonder if I'm missing any. How do you want us to make comments? Like I said, I can send out a little like diary or journal in a moment, because I don't think anybody's starting this like tomorrow, but if you are, let me know. And I think it might be kind of session by session. I found can be helpful, like day 1 thoughts, day 2 thoughts, just and again, a diary is like today I did this, this worked well, this didn't, I wondered about this, whatever it was, would be nice. But give what you can give. Some people just give kind of a holistic feedback at the end, and that's how they give feedback. And holistic feedback is good for holistic changes, and individual feedback is good for individual changes. I accept it all. And I can read between the lines sometimes when people are saying things, and I can transfer that across if I agree with the feedback. Should it be taught in addition to or separate from the other word love lessons? That's a good question. I think right now they're discrete. They're not like wedded together. But what you might find is that some of the word love individual words will have some of these word parts. And so that will be a great opportunity for you to say, by the way, look at this. Isn't that neat? Right? I think that would be the idea. I'm not trying to overwhelm you with vocabulary across your day, though. Everything vocabulary. This is something, if you feel like would be helpful to your class. Obviously, that it's sort of an opt-in type of thing, not that it's well, you better do your morphology and you better do your individual words, that you see the value in both. And because I know managing time is difficult of all the things that you're told or asked or invited to do. But yeah, I think you could certainly do it alongside, but it's just, they're not like designed to necessarily go together except by happenstance, because they'll have, some of the words will happen to have the word parts. Linda, are there any extensions for transfer? Well, the whole thing is designed for transfer, which is why we spend like 2 weeks on prefixes and 2 weeks on suffixes. Some people might be like, man, do kids really need the 2 weeks on them? Well, all of those little activities are designed for transfer. Are there extensions? I'll write little notes for extensions, because one thing that's interesting that I've noticed that You might want to give some spelling tips especially when you get to some of those suffixes, but that would just be like quick by the ways, like, hey, when you're adding a suffix that starts with a vowel, you usually drop the silent E, not always, but again, this is not focused on spelling, but it might be just a by the way, because it's just going to pop up because kids may be like, well, why is it spelled like this? And why is it spelled like that? Like, so the thing is designed for transfer, but there's also like little notes if you wanted to go a little bit further, where might that be appropriate. Student feedback is always lovely, from the mouths of babes, as they say. Yes. I mean, I get a sense that, and I'm just going to be honest because I don't want to lie to people. I get a sense that and I hope I'm wrong. You can tell me, but my feeling is that I don't know if there's as an innate passion that kids will have for studying word parts that they may have had for like the individual words and word love. But there are going to be times I do try to put in fun games, like if you follow the word love, I put in like little decision dilemmas for kids that are really fun. And there'll be more decision dilemmas like, would you rather have this not great thing or this not great thing? Like kids love that, right? It opens a discussion and they're kind of learning it. But I think, again, Lori, that's another thing I kind of learned. I know that learning individual words, kids are like, whoa, yes. And then breaking apart words, like, look, we're not all linguists, right? Like a certain small subset of people are linguists, and doing some of this work is doing kind of like a work of a linguist a little bit. And so it's important. I think it's valuable, but that's why it's brief. So I guess I mean to say that this morphology, and again, maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong. Maybe is engaging in it exactly or more than the sense of the individual word learning, but it might be a little bit more like eating your vegetables than like having a really salty sweet snack that's filling. You know what I mean? And that's not to denigrate this or morphology of this project. I am having the sense though that might be the case, although I'm open to being wrong. I mean, I think you're getting a sense here that I'm trying to be humble with this and I'm trying to be tentative. I'm really trying to be skeptical. It might be wonderful. It will be wonderful. I think it is. I made it. I'm proud of it. But I also want to be keep this within a realm of reality, and that's where you come in too. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's mostly it. If you have any questions, you certainly know how to reach out to me. And again, many of you probably saw the news today, so I think I should just say it here. Very bittersweet news. I'm moving on from the reading and writing project, and which is, like I said, it's bittersweet. I have so many memories. I am dyed in the wool with workshop, and I am so indebted to Lucy Calkins and all my colleagues. And now I'm going off under my own name, so that's exciting too. And this is, I guess, one of the first projects. So if you want to join me, as I mentioned in the earlier email, if you feel to contact me, if you want a different kind of partnership other than a pilot partnership, I'm now open for business, so to speak. So that's all I wanted to say there. Anyway, colleagues, thank you. I'm going to linger as always if people want to chat about anything, but I'm very grateful for your support, and I look forward to this journey that we're going to be on together. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.